All systems go. Clear for liftoff.
What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy GS Luke here with our DFS and fantasy stream for the Wyndham Championship. It's the last regular season of the event. We've got ourselves one last week before the FedEx Cup playoffs, and tour privileges, playing privileges, and playing time for next year is on the line for everyone in the field. So some extra drama to sweat out this week. Of course, some GPPs to try and take down, outright bets, all of that we can use to line our bankroll before some big events over the next few weeks. So this is where we're going to go over any of those last second questions that you've got, a weather report before this week, as well as some strategy for DraftKings. Anything on top of that you're curious about, it could be some player pool deep dives, process-based questions. Feel free to go ahead and pick my brain in the chat. But it looks like we got Gokulek down there. Welcome on in, my dude. Goku, as I might as well call him. We got Brant Ross as well, Mex, and also Steven. Let's get after it. And yeah, Team Sweaty Tryhards here on these live streams for sure, and especially those of you that are here early. But let's start it off with some golf course talk. And I usually like to talk about the conditions heading in, and it's going to be extremely humid for the first few rounds. So though it's not like last week where you had lift clean in place, a lot of rain before the event started, it's going to be pretty easy scoring, I would say. In fact, tomorrow it's like 90% humidity, so it would not surprise me at all if it rains sometime during play. And in fact, some of the forecasts, like the HRRR that we're about to go through, are calling for some rain in the afternoon. So even before it comes through, though, expect there to be dartboards out there, as the humidity is much higher than what we typically have this time of year. So I would say -1 to -1.5, even -2 scoring average could be in cards for this week. But if you're just getting to your research now, maybe you didn't have time to go through any course breakdowns, I'll give you the Spark Notes version of Sedgefield Country Club. It's a short course. It's only a 7,100 yard par 70, but with so many forced layups, it's truly a second shot golf course. Even if you are a bomber, a player that hits it over 300 yards off the tee, the shortest that you're going to have in is probably about 100 yards into a lot of these greens. It forces your hand from that perspective. So we're really looking for players that excel from 100 to about 150 yards. That is the main key stat at this golf course. And it's a Bermuda grass track, so agronomy-wise, you can cater your shots gained model in that direction. But it's not quite the birdie fest that we've had for the last few months. And while I do think that humidity is going to lead to perceptive greens and lower scores, it's not going to be, at least in my opinion, a -25 that's winning this thing. I have it closer to something in that -20 range, so a hair more difficult than some of the recent events, but still a lot of scoring that's going to be had. So to make the cut, you're probably looking at least -2 to -4 to make the cut to help set the table for your lineups over the next few days. But the weather is always something we want to look at for the first few rounds, and I don't see any massive edge for the first few days. Now, that's not to say that we won't get an edge in one direction or the other. It's just that as of right now, with the current forecasts, I don't see anything that's that predictable. So let's go to Thursday first, which looks pretty calm outside of this storm in the afternoon. I already kind of hinted at that, the potential for some rain during play. But it comes in around 5-6, which is going to be towards the very end of that PM wave. So it's not going to be a massive impact, right? It's only going to be there for maybe a half an hour to an hour. And the one thing I'll say is that when you have a storm that's going to drop about a half an inch of rain, like they're calling for on this model, is that's normally a thunderstorm that's dropping that kind of rain. It's not a sprinkle that's coming through when you're getting a whole half an inch of rain there. So even if we get a storm that comes through, I'm not sure that's going to hurt the PM guys as much. So I would say that Thursday looks pretty flat across the board. That storm makes it a little bit more unpredictable. There's a chance that it plays a little bit harder, but that would depend on them playing through the storm and it just being not a little shower that comes through. If it's only a half an hour to 45 minutes long, it's not really going to impact the scoring all that much. But if it's like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour storm that hits the golf course, then it might have a little bit more impact. So I would say that this Thursday situation is a bit unpredictable, but I really don't think it's going to make that big a difference. And then when we go to Friday, we typically look at the NEM model for that. it looks windy almost the entire day. So, if we expected it to be more windy, we might say, oh, Friday morning is where we want our plays. But by the time it's 8 a.m., you've already got 9 miles an hour of sustained winds, and it's going to stay at about that same number for the entire day. In fact, the wind gusts look a little bit higher in the morning than they do in the afternoon. So I could see it going either way, to be honest with you. Like, I could see the AM PM wave being slightly easier just because tomorrow morning they don't really have to deal with that threat of a storm. And then maybe on Friday it plays flat, and that's how they could see the advantage. But I could also see the other side being the advantageous wave if tomorrow the storm ends up being a thunderstorm and they delay it, and then they play more of their golf on Friday with the more receptive golf course. So I don't see anything that really looks clear cut as of right now. There are multiple different scenarios where I could see it benefiting one wave or the other by like a half a stroke. But even then, I'm a 150 max player. That's the sort of exposure that I get to from my main slate exposure. I didn't correlate anything. In my set of 150 lineups, I didn't run any correlation stacks. I thought about going like 10, 15% in either direction. But even then, I think at most it's maybe like a half a stroke advantage towards one wave or the other. It's not like Scottish weather where you could see swings of 1 to even 2 strokes on a single round. You're probably looking at most like a 1 stroke advantage for any given day here. And that would be in a perfect storm kind of scenario where the wind goes from nothing to blowing in the afternoon. Golf course goes from, let's say, receptive to dry in the afternoon as well. If you had that kind of scenario, it could be like a stroke between the 2 waves. But where you don't have anything like that for this kind of a week. So that's why I'm playing the weather a little bit more straight up. Not really a big part of my process, but I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that you could stack both sides, in particular if you are that 150 max player. So not something that I chose to do myself, but something that you could choose to do if you have that kind of portfolio. If you're entering 20 or less lineups, I really don't think it should be a consideration just because of how flat it looks for the first few rounds. So that's the weather. Any sort of questions, I'm going to take people back to the first 5 to 6 minutes of the live stream to get that sort of information. Next up, we're going to go through ownership towards the top end of the board. So player pool deep dives questions we're going to get to after we go through ownership. But when we're heading into lock, weather is always an important talking point, hence why we start there. But ownership would be the second most important thing. We need to know where the steam is heading into lock, and we need to know what the rest of the field is doing, because when we're playing DFS, when we're playing fantasy golf, like we're touching on here on this live stream, we're playing against not just trying to get the best projecting lineups, but we're also playing against the rest of the people that are entering the contest. And entering lineups without that sort of information is not an ideal situation. It is not a plus EV situation to be playing with your lineup. So we're going to go through all the ownership from 8K plus, kind of lay out where the rest of the field is going. And it doesn't mean that you have to avoid all the guys that are getting that attention, but taking stands against the rest of the field, knowing where you can leverage yourself against the rest of the large field GPP lineups is an extremely valuable tool. And like I said, not one that you want to use every single time. There are pieces of chalk every once in a while that you do want to cram into your lineups. But when you find an edge against a play, you find a really good reason for Xing somebody out of your player pool at high ownership. It does wonders. And, I think a lot of people think about DFS as trying to craft the perfect lineup, but fading the right chalk is also an art form and a way that a lot of the big pros like myself find an edge for any given week. So consider that. That's why we go through this ownership towards the top end of the board. Not the end all be all, but an extremely valuable tool nonetheless. So highest owned player in my projection. So this is from my projection sheet on my Patreon, by the way, a little bit different maybe than what SHIPIT Nation has posted, but I've got Matt Fitzpatrick as their highest owned player. And just behind him, Ben Griffin at about 22%. In fact, your top three players that are over $10,000 are all over 20%, which is a byproduct of the pricing. It is extremely soft on a week like this. This event is actually a lot stronger than it typically is. More guys that we typically see in the 7, 8, and 9K range are priced in their actual appropriate range this week. And, there are a lot of times, like maybe in the next month and a half, 2 months, especially with these fall series events, where we're going to have people that are $2,000, $3,000 too expensive because of how deep this field is. It feels like everyone is maybe not exactly where they'd be priced in a bigger field event, but at least in the same ballpark, which in my opinion makes the ownership and the game theory edge towards the top a lot more interesting than it otherwise would be. Because if it's a slate where everyone's overpriced, it's just everyone's like $1,500 to $2,000 too expensive, the people with the form always get the ownership. People just take their form horses towards the top. If they're going to play chalk, they do it with the guys that are, hitting the ball the best. That's not so much the case this week. Like an Aaron Rai, for example, is not playing the best golf, but he's still 20% owned because the pricing isn't atrocious. And, in Aaron Rai, he might be a little bit expensive from where he probably should be. Like he should be, in my opinion, like a mid 8K range guy with the kind of form that he has heading in here. But because it's not off by $1,500 to $2,000, he's still getting that 20% ownership as that returning champ. So in my opinion, it makes the slate a lot more interesting. It flattens out the ownership a little bit more in this kind of scenario. So for example, let me keep going down the board here, like a Robert McIntyre's 18%. He doesn't have the best form. You've got guys like Lucas Glover. His form's okay. He's number 8 in recent form ranking, but he's a guy who's won at this golf course before. You're seeing that course history bump a little bit more than we typically would. And maybe it's the Donald Ross design. Maybe it's the sticky course history at the Wyndham that everyone loves to talk about. But like Siwoo Kim, for example, number 39 in recent form ranking is the quote-unquote chalk in that 8K range. Him along with Kitayama and Glover would be your highest owned players in that portion of the board. 9K range, it's Rai, McIntyre, as we've already pointed out. Maybe a Harry Hall at about 17% as well. But we've got some guys that are low owned on the other side of that, right? The flip side of ownership kind of congregating on some of these course history guys is that you have players that are being overlooked. So for example, a Jordan Spieth, he doesn't have the best course history over the last 5 years. You got some sub 10 percenters in the 8K range, including an Adam Scott, who actually does have a decent track record at this course. Hasn't played it a ton, but has nearly won it in the past. Ryan Gerard, a Luke Clanton at only 6.4% projected ownership. There are spots where you can really get different to the field. And though that course history has been sticky at the Wyndham Championship, especially for the players that don't have a large sample size, I'm willing to take shots in the dark. There have been first timers. Guys in their first, maybe second trip to this golf course that have found success in the past. At least for me, it's just how I'm approaching this slate. I think that there's a lot of course history guys this week that are unnecessarily chalky. And there are a couple that I'm still throwing into laps, like maybe 1 or 2 that are 8K plus. But a lot of them, over half of them, we'd say, of those course history guys that are really popular, I'm not using in my lineups for this week. So ownership towards the top, you guys can get a picture from 8K plus. It's an important part of your process towards the top end of the board. It's nice to be able to get different where you can, but it becomes even more important the further down the board that you go. So the 7K range, for example, it's a little bit more important than the 8K range when it comes to getting that game theory edge. 6K range, even more so than that 7K range. The 6K range, it's probably this part of the board where it's the most important to get different. And the reason for that, and it's very easy to show, is the further down the board you go, the gap between the highest and the lowest owned players get wider and wider and wider. And I'm not talking about raw number, because towards the top, the raw percentage might be higher than it is towards the bottom end of the board, but we're talking on a percentage-wise basis, right? The percentage difference from the highest to the lowest owned player gets exponentially bigger the further down the board that you go. So for example, the lowest owned 10K guy is 20%, your highest owned is 23%. There's hardly any difference in ownership at the top. The next range, your highest owned is 20% versus the lowest owned at about 13%. It's not even double, right? 13% is more than half of that 20%. Now, the 8K range, it starts to get a little bit wider. So your lowest owned is 6.4%. Your highest owned is about 16%. So now it's over that 2X mark. I know we don't have the ownership on here. I do have to keep that behind the paywall for my Patreon members. But you get the idea, right? That trend that we showed you continues even more so the more that you go. In fact, in the 7K range, I think the highest to the lowest owned player is probably closer to like 10, 15 times. Not 10, 15%, 10 to 15 times the ownership from the highest to the lowest owned player. And then in the 6K range, if we really cherry picked it and went the 0.1 percenter at the bottom versus, I think the highest owned guy in my projections might be like 4 or 5% in that range, you're talking about 50 to 100x ownership on some of those plays. So that's why it becomes more important to take those game theory decisions and take stands against the rest of the field, because the opportunities to do so are so much more plentiful. Because, let's say that you're quote unquote getting different by taking Keegan as opposed to a Matt Fitzpatrick up top. No, you aren't. Really, ownership on these top 3 players is negligible when they're within that same sort of number. And even in this 9K range where it becomes a little bit more interesting, let's do the most extreme example we can. Let's go Aaron Rai versus Jordan Spieth. oh, I'm getting different by playing Jordan Spieth as opposed to Aaron Rai. Not really. I mean, 20% sure is a relatively high ownership number, but 13%, it's still a significant portion of the field, right? It's not like you're talking about in the 6K range where we're comparing guys that are 5-6% to players that are 0.4 to 0.5%. And it just has so much more impact on your game theory and the sort of leverage that you're getting towards the rest of the field. So that's why you'll see me playing guys like Ben Griffin, despite that kind of ownership. There are players here like a Siwoo Kim, for example, that I'm using in lineups that are still getting that steam and I'm playing them towards the top. But that's also why in the 6-7K range, if you guys can see my player pool, if you check my exposure after lock tomorrow, you're not going to see me playing the popular guys in that 6-7K range. So whether you're part of the SHIPIT Nation site, my website, my Patreon page on those projections, whatever sort of ownership source you have, I would say you want to be a part of my page or the SHIPIT Nation page if you guys want the most accurate projections that are out there. But make sure you implement that game theory. Get different towards the rest of the field. If you want to beat the rest of the field in your large field GPP lineups, you're not going to do it by accident. You need to have a game plan to move up in those leaderboards. And it usually includes playing 2, maybe 3 guys in a lineup where you're taking average to below average ownership. And notice I didn't say 5-6 guys out of your 6 in a lineup that are at that average to below average ownership. Just a sprinkle of some low ownership, right? A few guys where if you play them and they're only like 5 to 10% owned, you're actually getting some leverage versus the rest of the field. That's what I'm talking about with your lineup construction. So that's the ownership segment. That's laying out the slate in general for you guys. Now let's go over any specific questions that you've got for this week, as well as any player pool deep dives. And we've got a whole lot of data to go through. This is from my Patreon sheet. This is the research sheet that I give people to use. We're going to be able to go through recent form. We're going to go through event history on any of those deep dives that you've got. Also shots gained metrics over the last 24 and last 12 measured rounds. So let me get a sip of water. Let me catch up on the chat and see where we are, guys. And yeah, hit me up with anything that you guys are curious about. What's going on? Yeah, you saying it's Clark's signature event? Wyndham at the Wyndham. What's going on? Sites, he said stat deep dive on Vince Whaley for sure. So let's start with the last 12 rounds, and then we'll go to the last 24, just so that we could see how he's playing heading into this event. So last 12 measured rounds look extremely favorable. Losing off the tee, which is, I don't want to say completely excusable at a course like this, but there's only really 7 driver holes out of the 18. So if there's a course where you can get away with not being the strongest off the tee player, this is one of those courses. The rest of the game has been fantastic, gaining about a stroke per round with the iron play. Putter, normally a bigger part of his game. He's I don't want to say an elite tier putter, but a well above an average putter on the PGA Tour. So this stat profile has to be at least a 6 out of 10. I might even push it to a 6.5, 7 out of 10, because Whaley gaining strokes with the irons is not something we always see. I mean, he's not the most consistent player in that category. If anything, that's normally what we nitpick about him, is that he's inconsistent at best in that category. Not so much recently, though. So I do want to look at the last 24 rounds, though, just to kind of fact check it, see what he was doing before that. So still losing off the tee, but not nearly as bad. That's okay. That's kind of his MO. He's not the best player, but the driver, but gaining a little bit less significantly with the irons, but still 0.57 shots gained per round, better than almost everyone around him. In fact, I think everyone other than a Victor Perez, Adam Svensson in that range. Yeah, we'll give him the 6.5 out of 10 stat profile, maybe 6 out of 10 if we're going to be being really harsh, I guess, with those rankings. Maybe going like, oh, the last 24 rounds haven't been that good. Still mighty fine solid, though. So I have to say, not somebody that I played in lineups, but was highly in consideration. What's going on? Zach, welcome on in. He said, cheers to another season. Yep, cheers to that. I don't know how many it's officially been on the channel that we've covered, but I think it's 4 or 5 at this point. So yeah, cheers, man. They go by quickly, that's for sure. What's going on? Cody, he said, does Griffin come back to form? Yeah, if you're talking about Benji, my guy at the top end of the board, I think it's a good week for him. He loves this golf course. He's got a couple top 10 finishes at this event in his 3 starts. Also, the form, I think, has been sneaky good on a Ben Griffin. If you're talking about Lanto, who I think is playing this week, not as high on him, but yeah, Ben, I think that he's got a real good shot. He said, you're the man. I appreciate that, Patrick. He said, appreciate the hard work. Of course, hey, we're at the end of the year, but it doesn't feel like it's been a whole year at this point. It's gone by a lot quicker than I wanted it to. And then he said, Kim Bros 1 through 10 between Siwoo and Tom Kim. So yeah, let's start with Siwoo Kim. First off, the Donald Ross history on Siwoo Kim is, I believe, the best of anyone in the field. If it's not the best on Donald Ross courses, he's like first or second in that category. He's played extremely well here. He's played well at the Rocket Classic before. A few of the other Donald Ross designs that we've seen mixed in on the tour schedule, Siwoo Kim is like a top 25 machine at those tracks. So that's the first data point that supports him. That last 24 rounds, he's gaining in every category but the putter. That's always the issue for Siwoo. He's a terrible putter. I think he'll be the first one to tell you that. But then if we go to the last 12 measured rounds, the ball striking remains. In fact, maybe gets a little bit better than that last 24 round sample size, which is why I'm playing Siwoo Kim this week. Like, the ownership's there. I understand that he's going to get steam at these Donald Ross designs. But as I was mentioning with that ownership component, like those 6-7K range players are really where we want to narrow down on it. If you've got what's the word for it? I can't think of it. It's on the tip of my tongue, but a play that you know that like you shouldn't take because of the ownership, but you're going to do it anyways. You do it towards the top end of the board, right? You don't do it with like a 6-7K guy. You don't take that risk on ownership when it's a slapdick that you're using. When it's a proven tour winner like Siwoo, a guy that's torn up the Donald Ross designs, that's when a guilty pleasure is what I was looking for, right? It's like when you know you shouldn't be having that extra cookie, but you do anyways. My guilty pleasure, I like to have like nuts, like peanuts when I'm trying to have a snack, and I know I probably shouldn't, just so that like it's not as shitty. Like, it's a high fat content snack, but it's got some protein to go with it, and it's a whole lot better than grabbing like a donut or something like that as your guilty pleasure, right? Your guilty pleasure in the 6-7K range would be like the pack of Hostess donuts. Like, you're eating it at midnight, you're maybe didn't work out that day, you know that whatever you eat is just going to go directly to the stomach. You don't want to do that with a guy that sucks, a slappy, towards the bottom end of the board. If you have something like some nuts or maybe, I don't know, some strawberries, even if it's like a sweet thing like a banana before bed, you have a better chance of it just not going to the gut and you getting fat. So that's what I would say about the ownership. That's why I think a guy like Siwoo is, it's still guilty pleasure, but he's okay to use. And then the other one was Tom Kim. So Tom Kim's won this event before. I feel like a lot of people have forgotten about that because it was, 3 years ago at this point. Hasn't played here since, which is crazy. Normally you defend your title, but Tom Kim, for whatever reason, just decided not to for the last few seasons. And the shots gained metrics, particularly over the last 12 rounds, have been a lot better on Tom Kim. He had been struggling really in every category for a while. Let's see, let's get it up right here. Gaining a stroke per round with his approach play, and then still losing off the tee, but much more respectable at the short game categories. There had been a time this year where he was losing across all four. I mean, he looked like he was lost. He was missing more cuts than he was making. So the fact that he's now gaining tee to green, the putter has been okay, not great. It feels like he's moving in the direction of being a top tier player again. And he still has to do a little bit more to prove it to me for me to say that he's back to what he was before. I mean, at one point, guys, we were looking at this guy like a top 10 player on tour. I mean, he was playing like that, especially his rookie year, his first maybe year and a half on the PGA Tour. He was playing to that kind of level. Now he's a $7,500 golfer in the Wyndham Championship. So, I mean, the price tag is still astronomically low given the talent level that we have there. So stat-wise, I guess I forgot to give you the stat number on Siwoo, but stat-wise on Siwoo, it's like a 6.5 out of 10. Ball striking was solid, but he was losing with the putter. Tom Kim, it's like a 5.5, maybe a 6 out of 10. It's not as solid. We go to the last 24 rounds, you can see it falls off a bit. This includes some of the more sketchy form that we've had for Tom. You can see only gaining about 2.2 strokes per round on approach as opposed to an entire stroke. And we had over our last 12 rounds, but better than what it was before. And, a 5.5, a 6 out of 10 stat profile on Tom Kim is just night and day difference than earlier this year. I mean, we were talking 1.5, 2 out of 10 a few months ago on him. He said, hey, Luke's thoughts on Camilo and then Paul Peterson. So two real ugly names that I really wasn't expecting to see. But Paul Peterson is somebody that in my modeling was popping a lot more than I expected. He's an accurate player. He's not a distance player off the tee. So really the only tracks you're going to see him showing up are ones like this that are closer to 7,000 yards. He's an accuracy player, and he's really good from 100 to 150 yards. So if you're a believer in some of the key stats that I'm emphasizing, then Paul Peterson should be on your radar. But there's also the other aspect of golf and really just handicapping golf in general, where we've got to remember who we're dealing with, right? It's Paul Peterson, who I think has been in contention once this year, and that was only through like the first 2 or 3 rounds, and then he fell off, and then has been pretty much a ghost the rest of 2025. And you guys know I'm not one to try and be harsh on these players. I know how hard it is to try and be a professional regardless of what you do. But yeah, we got to remember who we're dealing with at the same time. So a good stat popper, I would say, but there's a reason why he's at that portion of the pricing. And then Camilo, he's been extremely inconsistent this year, but he's been another guy who's popped for a round or two. So those sort of guys, I don't know if I love them in main slate as much as I would take them as a flyer in showdown, because I could see them having a -5, -6 round at some point. If they get hot, hit some fairways, and then find that hot putter, that's asking a lot. That's why I really don't see them putting it together for 4 straight rounds. But like round 1, round 2 showdown, if they make the cut round 3 or 4 showdown, those are the kind of guys that I'll mix in from time to time. Not so much a main slate, because making a cut isn't enough. Like in the big $5 or $25, our 6K guys, we need a made cut and then probably a top 10 to make sure that they're an optimal play. Top 15 sometimes gets the job done, depending on how many birdies that they're posting. I just have concerns that they can really do that in both cases. Like the form's not there, but maybe more so on a showdown play, I would say. Can I get a deep dive on your guy, Rio? So yeah, Hisatune's form earlier this year was a lot better than what we're going to see here, but it hasn't been so bad that like I can't get there. So last 24 rounds, he's gaining in all 3 tee to green categories and then losing putting. The putting is what's overdoing all of his tee to green gains, but I've seen a lot worse stat profiles before. Like he's just like a neutral in most categories. Go to the last 12 measured rounds. So this is where it's fallen off a bit more. The ball striking is still there, but overseas on those fescue greens, also with some of the Midwestern bent grass, he has struggled. He's losing 3/4 of a stroke per round around the green, almost a stroke per round with the putting over that last 12 rounds. Bermuda grass could be exactly what he needs to get back to what he was doing before. So the stat profile on Rio is at best a 5, because I mean, he's losing strokes over his last 2 sets of shots gained metrics there. However, the stats that we care about the most, I guess over his last 12 rounds, he is losing technically between those 2 categories, but it's about a neutral over that sample size. Last 24 rounds, though, which is the larger, more consistent, more reliable sample size out of those 2, he's at least gaining off the tee and with his approach play. And that's the case with a few plays that I'm getting to. Like, there's a reason why I love JT Poston this week. Poston's stats, not great. So, for example, if we go up to JT Poston here, he's gaining low off the tee and then losing about 0.12 strokes per round, the approach play. But so if we go to the last 12 rounds on Poston, this will be like especially apparent on him. He's maybe a more extreme example of the player that we were just going through, but he's gaining off the tee, losing on approach, and then losing about a half a stroke putting. Rio, right, losing like 1.5 strokes with the short game. I feel like the issue for the short game players, like a Poston Rio, is that when you take them from gaining a half a stroke to a stroke short game per round to losing a half a stroke to a stroke short game per round, that's taking away their fastball, right? It's like Randy Johnson not being able to throw his 102-mile-an-hour cheese. It's like Paul Skeens not being able to go pump fastballs past people. You do that, you make them an off-speed pitcher, and people are going to be taking them a yard the entire day. Poston on those bumpy-ass greens, that's why I think this is such a good golf course for him, because the greens at Sedgefield are pure. Some of the most primo greens that we get on the entire year, which is great for an elite tier putter like a JT Poston. But Rio could have been dealing with the same thing, right? I liked Poston because ball striking's been okay enough that I can get there. Just give me that regression on that Bermuda grass, and it could be a really good week. Rio, you could say a whole lot of the same stuff about. So I would say like 5 out of 10 stat-wise, but I think it could be a good bounce-back spot. And of course, prep. He said, how do I feel about going to a more balanced 9K build? Seems like you don't lose as much win equity. Yeah, I could see that argument. So if your argument is that you don't really see like one of these 10K guys winning, a lot of times when there's Scotty, there's Rory, there's more elite tier players that we have to choose from, there is a lot of opportunity cost in not playing a 10K. But this week, I would have no apprehension against that. In fact, I'm going to have a lot of lineups that aren't starting with a 10K player just out of default. Like I've got, I think 2 of the top 3 guys in my player pool, but I'm only taking like 35-40% of either of them. So I believe it's like 25 to 30% of my lineups that don't have any of those 10K players. I think it's a doable strategy. I think salary-wise, it has its benefits as well. You don't have to play the week 6K range at a golf course like this, in a golf event like this. I'm all for it, man. In fact, yeah, I'm building that way in quite a few lineups. Kevin asking about my guy Spieth. I'm going to plead the fifth on Spieth this week. There's a reason for it. I don't want to jinx him or anything, but you could probably read between the lines and figure out what I think about him. But yeah, we're going to plead the fifth on Spieth this week. And he's my favorite player. So there's certain guys I don't feel bad about putting the announcer jinx on, but I would feel terrible about Jordan. Let's go with Harry Hall 1 through 10, though, your other question. So Harry Hall 1 through 10, I mean, form, if you love top 25s, is some of the best that you have in the entire field. He's gaining about 1.7 shots gained per round over his last 24 rounds. He's gaining in all 4 stat categories, but shout out to my guy Byron from the Fantasy Degenerates. He pointed this out. I guess I just hadn't realized it. But he doesn't have a top 5 since like last year's Charles Schwab, or maybe it's like 2 years ago at the Charles Schwab. It was like his last top 5 finish in like a regular tour event. I know in some like weaker field events, he's just destroyed them. And that's why he has the standing that he does. Harry Hall to me is a cash play. If the lack of top end upside is going to be there and he's $9,200, I mean, at that kind of price tag, we're going to need a top 5. Top 5 locks in an optimal play at that kind of price, but a top 10 maybe gets you there at that sort of price tag. If he doesn't have any top 10s in like the last whole season, then I don't see the upside of using him in DFS. So at least in large field GBPs, where you have to have the absolute nuts. Now in a cash format, or just trying to beat half the field, or even a single entry where you don't have to have the absolute nuts to take it down, I think Harry Hall makes a lot more sense there, but he's kind of got the Corey Connors syndrome. And Russell Henley had been dealing with this for a while. Russell Henley has shed that over the last year. And thankfully, thank God, I think it was seeing it in person that shaked this belief out of me, and it did it just in time. Is I saw Russell Henley get into contention. He did not back down. He looked like a dog. And I kind of like, okay, maybe he can. Just give it to us on Saturday and Sunday. But Corey Connors, still to this day, is in that category for me. And then I guess Harry Hall is starting to get into that as well, of Hall of good guys, good, not greats, players that are really solid at making cuts, getting us those top 30s, decent DraftKings scoring as well. Like he makes a good amount of birdies. But especially in it was like the last 3 years, Corey Connors has only been in the optimal lineup like once, maybe twice. Before that, I think Russell Henley had only been in the optimal lineup for like 1 time in the last 2 years or something crazy like that. Harry Hall's approaching that kind of territory. So I wanted to give that spiel, that little bit of a rant on Harry Hall. And I'll go back to the Jordan Spieth one. Please don't use him, guys. I would like him to be low owned, but I bet him outright this week for a reason. Let's just put it that way on Jordan Spieth. I am extremely high on his chances, but we're going to leave it at that. And I just don't want to jinx them, guys. So my bad if it seems like I'm weird on that one. He said, what's up, Luke? Thoughts on both the Svensons? So Jesper's relatively chalky this week, which has to do with his form. He's one of the top 5 form players of anyone in the field. So that is extremely favorable for him. So I think you're going to have to pay for it with the ownership, but perhaps it's warranted with how he's playing. And then the other Svensson, so Adam Svenny, showing up really for the first time last time out. I'm not as high on him because I played him last time out because he was like 1% owned. He was in the 6K range. Now he's like 4 to 5 times the ownership and he's more expensive. In my opinion, the form before that for Adam Svensson makes him, at least in my perspective on this slate, maybe not the best play. The reason why I say that is, I mean, why weren't people using him before then? Right? He was 0.5% owned and he was $6,500. And now everyone wants to use him now that he's $7,000 something dollars. I believe I'd have to double check the exact price, but the ownership is infinitely higher than what it was before. Let's see. So he's $6,900. So top into that 6K range. That's why I'm personally staying away. It's easier as somebody that played him last week and that took advantage of him at essentially that 0.4, 0.5%. But yeah, it feels like you're chasing a bit if you're taking him this week. Can I do a deep dive on Robert McIntyre? For sure. So his form is not terrible, but it's just not as flashy as maybe some of the other guys around him. So this is the last 12 rounds that we're looking at. He's gaining across all 4 categories, which it's hard to nitpick that, right? He's quite literally above average in every single category, but he's not getting that kind of steam. Like I showed him with the ownership before. He was like 17, 18% owned. There's not a ton of people getting there. So yeah, solid form. Same thing with Hideki. He's gaining across the board. Same thing with Jordan Spieth though. So all 3 of these guys are all playing pretty much the same kind of golf. And yeah, Spieth is the lowest owned. Probably has to do with why I think it's a good week for him, huh? I hate that I had to give that away on Spieth because now I feel like I jinxed him. But yeah, it wasn't just the fact that he's played well, but it's also the comments that he's made. Let's see. Do I bet top 20 or to prefer a top 5, top 10? So I bet a lot of top 5, top 10s. I also bet top 20s depending on the player. Here's the best way to put it. So top 20s are normally bets that I take for 6K range players, as opposed to like top 5, top 10s are more so for my 7, 8K range guys that I'm targeting. Top 5s are normally on like 8, 9K guys. Top 20s, like on guys that are towards the 8, 9K range, you're not normally going to get a very good number on that. Typically, you're getting like plus 100, plus 150 odds on that sort of thing with an elite tier player. So the number just isn't good enough for me. And I know there could be an edge sometimes on a bet like that, especially if you find the right player at that kind of number. But I don't force it most of the time. It's normally like the top 20s I'm taking on 6K range players. Just how I bet. I know a lot of people do things differently, but I guess it just depends on what you prefer. Oh, God, we got some weird guy in the chat. Okay. I'll just ban you again. I don't know if that guy made another account to talk crap or whatnot, but he claimed I'm a trust fund baby, which I wish I was. If I was a trust fund baby, I would not be doing this right now. I can tell you that. I'd be on a yacht in the middle of the Mediterranean off of Malibu or something. Sorry, what I call Malibu. That's off the coast of California, off of Monaco or something like that, right? If I was a trust fund baby. Oh, I wish. That would be the life, my dude. But anyways, I'll send you on your way, my dude. We don't need you around here. Let's see. Do I feel like Rosner is a good value play? That his form has been impressive? Yeah, the form's been okay. I don't know if impressive is the word that I'd use, because like, what is he like, just making cuts, finishing like 30th or that kind of thing? The iron form, though, has been better than a lot of the other players around him. So not to give away too much, but he is somebody that I'm using in some exposure this week. He's not one of like my favorite plays in that range, but yeah, impressive. I don't know if I'd go that far. It's better form than the guys around him, but he is a 6K range guy for a reason. If we zoom out to the last 24 rounds, the form holds up. He's still gaining strokes on approach. So yeah, I'm okay with some Rosner, I guess. Deep dive on the Spider-Man Lee Hodges. Stan Lee, huh? I like the nickname you're giving him there. So over the last 12 measured rounds, let me give you the lowdown on his stats. So he's gaining on approach, losing in the other 3 categories. Let's go to the last 24 rounds as well. Let's see. Also gaining on approach and then losing in the other 3 categories. So he's doing it very consistently. In fact, it's kind of like the Rosner approach. The difference, though, is Rosner is a little cheaper than Lee Hodges, a couple $100 cheaper, and also lower owned. So I guess if we're comparing Hodges to Rosner, it makes Rosner look like a better play than what he does in a vacuum, because you're getting him at maybe half the ownership as a Lee Hodges, and you're getting that price discount. So yeah, that's half the reason I'm using Rosner this week, but we'll see if it holds up. He's got to hit some fairways. He's a sprayer off the tee at times. Is it Kiz season for Kevin Kisner? I don't know if I can get there, man. I mean, he's doing more announcing than he is playing at this point. I do like to see that he started to play better, though. I mean, he's made some cuts. Heck, he's even gotten into the first-round leader conversation once or twice over the last month or two. So I'll be rooting for him, at least with my fandom and whatnot. But I don't know if I can get there for DFS. There are just players down towards the bottom that I think are better options. And I don't have a whole bunch of guys at the bottom end of the 6K range that I'm personally using this week, but like there are probably 5 to 10 guys I'd rather have than Kisner towards the bottom. So he's not out of play. I could see him spiking for maybe a good showdown round or two. That's kind of what I was saying with Camilo before. Some of those guys that are maybe a little nastier for 4 rounds is they could put it together for 18 holes. That's what we've seen for Kiz over the last few events. He's had one good round that has carried him to a made cut. That's probably the better place to take advantage of it. And, you know, with these older guys, part of it's fatigue too. They're just not capable of stringing together 4 straight good rounds, but they are capable of doing it in 18-hole sample sizes. So that's personally where I lean on that one. You're looking at Brian Campbell 1 through 10. So course fit wise, I'll give you a 6 out of 10. I was going to say 5 out of 10. We'll go 6 out of 10. You play him at courses where you don't have to be a bomber. So that fits the narrative this week. He's relatively accurate from that department as well. Wedge play too. He's above average in most of those wedge proximity buckets. The issue with Brian Campbell's the form. I mean, the form outside of every once in a while, him popping up into contention, horrendous. I mean, losing a stroke per round off the tee. That's the last 24 round sample size too. So this isn't like he had a bad event or two, right? This is a bad couple months off the tee. And then if we go to the last 12 rounds, he's losing 0.75 shots gained approach per round. Campbell, in my opinion, and does not make him a terrible play, what I'm about to say, but it makes him an extremely risky play. GPP only option. You only use him at the big $5 or $25 because when he plays well, he gets himself into the mix to actually win the event. When you're trying to beat 20 to 50,000 people, that's gold. You want those sort of players in your lineups. Not so much in a cash lineup, but not so much in the contests where you don't have to have the absolute nuts. You're bringing on a lot of risk, a lot of miscut equity with a Brian Campbell. But when you get them right, it tends to pay off. Do I ever have an opinion on Eric Cole or Svensson? Yeah, I always have opinions on those sort of players. Svenny, Adam Svensson, I think you're chasing on him. I kind of gave that opinion before. Eric Cole, sneaky good course fit. You take him at courses that aren't super off the tee heavy. He's from down here in South Florida. He's from the town that I'm from. So a lot of respect, a lot of love for Eric Cole. I was one of the first people in the content industry to even talk about him before his near win at the Honda a few years ago. That was when it was the Honda, before it even changed to the Cognizant. We were already looking at Eric Cole. So yeah, I like him at these style golf courses, and I'm using him in a few lineups this week. So I don't want to steam him up too much, Big Rob, but yeah, especially on the Eric Cole side, I can get there. So it said, how's it going, Steven? What's going on, Mike? The chat chatting up each other. 1 through 10 on Matt Wallace. So if Wallace was cheaper and not getting the ownership, I'd be at like a 7 out of 10 on Wallace because the form is the best that I've seen on Wallace for at least a year. He's gaining across all 4 stat categories. That's over the last 12 rounds. You go to the last 24 rounds, it's the same thing. He's, I guess, a neutral off the tee. So can't technically say that he's into the positive right there. But Wallace, a couple months ago, had been into the negative in at least 2, even 3 of the shots gained categories. And I think at one point early in 2025 was losing across all 4. So the fact that he's gone from losing across all 4 to kind of shitty to now gaining across all 4 categories is great. But now he's more expensive. Now he's like 5-6 times the ownership that he was before. So I think if you're buying in now on a Matt Wallace, that you're buying the peak. It's kind of like with Adam Svensson, where if you're playing him now, I feel like you're a week or two too late because I hate to say it's like too late because they had those performances and it's hard to back it up in back-to-back weeks, but it's true. Golf's extremely variant. We had guys like Thor Bjornsson, who a few weeks ago was the chalkiest player on the slate at like 30%, and then he missed the cut. I mean, Wallace, not to shit on him too much, but he's a lower tier player than those sort of guys. Like, he could easily do the same exact thing. So I'm a little hesitant on those players that are just popping off over their last few months or so, especially when the sample size before that was a little bit lower. So I love the form on him. I wish that he was lower owned to GPPs because I could see myself getting there. But at that kind of ownership, somebody that I personally decided to fade. Am I playing Kanaya, and can I do a deep dive? So not going to answer the am I playing part. I do have my Patreon page where you guys can find my entire player pool, but I will go through a stat breakdown for you. So over his last 12 rounds, he's gaining in every category except the approach play, which is a bit of a red flag. You normally want guys gaining in that category. It's the most transferable stat from week to week. And the other part about Kanaya that maybe makes him a little bit of a worse play is that he's now priced up and now a little bit chalkier now that he had that run into contention. So a lot of these players that you guys have been pointing out for questions over the last couple are, in my opinion, great examples of spots where you might want to fade some of these some of these higher owned guys that are a little bit lower priced, because you're taking them 1 week late, right? This week it's going to be most likely there might be one or two of one of these guys that goes off in back-to-back weeks, but it's probably going to be another batch of slapdicks that are up towards the top end of the board. So I wouldn't go chasing at the 6 and 7K range players. Are we going back to Eric Cole? I am, Ross. Not just the fact that I like the guy, but I think that he's setting up well with the stats as well. What are my thoughts on Victor Perez? And he said, is that a pivot from others in that range? So I guess a word of caution on Perez. We don't have the ownership number exactly on here. Let me control F so I can show you he's priced around him. But compared to the other guys around him, he's one of the higher owned players. In fact, even though he has worse form than Fishburne, I've got him as the higher owned player. So ownership wise, he's not a pivot. In fact, he's maybe the chalk of the players at $6,900. But the form, the shots gained metrics, the putting on Bermuda grass is very favorable. And I kind of understand why he's getting that steam. So yeah, he's one of, there's very few guilty pleasures that I'm taking towards the bottom end of the board. He's, I think, the only one this week. I am using him in laps, by the way. That's what that means. And hopefully doesn't burn me. We'll see. Does Bez get to 40% in GPPs? Absolutely not. I think he'll be a little higher owned than some of the guys around him, but you're probably looking at closer to 10%, my man. 40% is probably pushing it a little bit too much. What are my thoughts on Hoey and Højgaard specifically at 7,300? So which Højgaard? You're talking Rasmus, I'm guessing, right? Because it's $7,300. So yeah, you're talking about the Højgaard brother with a little bit of worse form. So I like the upside on Højgaard. I'd say in GPPs, if you're comparing the two, that I'd rather have Rasmus than Rico. Rico's slightly higher owned out of the two because he's got better form than Rasmus. But in terms of range of outcomes, in terms of like top 5, top 10 potential, Rasmus has more volatility. He's a more aggressive player. He's got the higher birdie percentage between the two players. I think Rasmus is the better GPP play where we want that upside. We want that top 5, top 10 potential. Rico Hoey, though, and he hits a lot of fairways. I didn't know this until a couple weeks ago when I was deep diving him for props, but he's like a top 30 driving accuracy player on tour, which really fits this golf course well, but he hardly ever top 10s. Like he's just a top 25 machine, kind of like some of the other players that are a little bit more consistent that we've already mentioned, which in my opinion makes them better for cash or for some of your smaller field GPPs. So yeah, I guess large field GPP, if you need that differentiation, Rasmus should be lower owned as well, and the higher upside player. But other formats, Rico's the one that I would probably take. Jonathan says, hey, Luke, you said you're battling recent form versus course history. Is there one that I favor between the two? So yeah, you want to incorporate both. Both are like pieces of the puzzle. You can't put it all together without having all those different pieces. If I had to choose between the two, though, I would favor course history. And I kind of feel like terrible even saying that because I don't really like favor one or the other. That's not how I look at it. I use them in conjunction in reality. But if you forced me, like bullet to the head, you said, hey, you had to choose between the two, I would go course history because the Bermuda grass is so much different than the agronomy we've had for the last month or two that you're going to see some wild comebacks. Like, for example, like we were talking about some of the chalkier guys in the 6-7K range that like a Svensson Kanaya. That was on a different type of agronomy. And like, that's why I think the slapdicks that pop off this week, they're by default usually different because of how volatile golf is. But I think it's going to be even more so different this time because the golf course is a lot different too. So yeah, I'd say course history, but you got to take both of those. He said no love for Valimaki. So yeah, I'm not a huge lover for him this week, but yeah, just because we don't talk about somebody doesn't mean that I don't have love for him. Got to say the shots gained metrics on Valimaki are some of the better in that range. So just to show you guys, he's gaining on approach. He's also gaining with the putter. Go to the last 24 rounds. He's actually losing on approach. So yeah, I don't know. He's cheap, $6,600, nice price tag. That's probably the main thing I'd point out about Sammy. But stats wise, it's like a 5.5 out of 10. It's solid. It's actually better than most in this range, particularly over the last 12 rounds where he's gaining with that approach play. But there are better, at least players with the form around him, like Matteo Manicero. Like he kind of stands out a little bit more. Rosner, we already had a few questions about him, maybe even a Carson Young. But yeah, don't sleep on my guy Sammy. He's got the nice hair going too. He said, if one is playing Fitz and Griffin, who are the guys to avoid in the 7K range? So yeah, the high-owned players, Aaron, would be the players that you'd want to avoid, especially if you're going chalk towards the top. So yeah, the high-owned players, which you can find on any ownership sources. If you want to find mine, you can find them on the Patreon page. Do I feel that Mao's recent play is a fluke? I wouldn't say it's a fluke. He's always been touted as like a high pedigree guy, but I'd be a little hesitant about it this week. Different type of agronomy, different type of golf course than some of the birdie fests that we've been playing over the last month. Is there any thoughts on Rasmus for first round leader? So yeah, to go back to the question about Rasmus before, like that's the kind of format that you play him in. Like you play him in showdown, you play him in a DFS format where birdies and aggressiveness matters. And I mean, let's think about it tomorrow. If he shoots +5, well, he wasn't going to be first round leader anyways. He doesn't have his best stuff. Then you didn't have to worry about it to begin with. But if we get the good Rasmus, the one that's in flow states that, I mean, has won multiple times on the DP World Tour, then book it. He could get that first round leader for you. So I think that's a good way to deploy him this week. If players club down off the tee, could I please highlight a player or two? So not sure what the question really means, to be honest. You're saying if players club down, could I please highlight a player or two? So you're saying like guys that might club down more than others? You'll have to expand on that question, Brandon. I want to give you what you're looking for exactly with that. I'm assuming that you're looking for guys that might do that more than others. I would say your bombers are the ones that are going to lay up more than others. So if you're talking about in general, like your Jesper Svenssons, he's not going to have to hit a whole bunch of drivers. A whole lot of the field in general isn't going to have to hit driver a whole lot. But yeah, maybe it impacts the longer players a bit more. Is it Hoey is the lowest rated putter on the PGA, like 177th? That is correct. He's not a great putter, but he's a very consistent ball striker, which is why he gets you those top 25s. And it's also why he doesn't get you a lot of those top 5 finishes, because he doesn't bring along the flat stick in that short game along with that ball striking every week. So that's the same thing with Corey Connors, by the way. Coco, he's been better putting over the last year or so, but especially when he was first getting onto the PGA Tour, flusher tee to green, gaining like a stroke and a half per round. When he first got out here, he was losing like a stroke per round putting. Now, he's actually even gone into the positive over the last season or two, hence why he's even getting to the point now where like he's starting to give us some more top-end finishes. But yeah, that's the ball striking type of way. What's going on, Schmitty? He said, would I consider a 16-man player pool in 4 lineups aggressive? No, that's not aggressive, I would say. I mean, I would actually try and condense that down a little bit more from 16. I mean, in a 3 max, let me think about a 3 max, because like a 4 max is pretty much the same thing as a 3 max. 3 max, I'm normally at like 12 players, maybe like 14. I wouldn't say that it's aggressive, Schmitty, but like 16 is a decent amount for a set of 4 lineups. You're going to have some crossover if that's the case between those 16 players, but you might want to get a little bit more crossover, right? You might want to make some of your like not 7K range, some of your 8, 9, and 10K range players a little bit more of conviction plays and use them in like 2, maybe even 3 of those 4 lineups. So I think you're on the right track there, but yeah, I wouldn't call that aggressive, if that makes sense. All right, let's round this off with some lineup construction and then get this thing going. By the way, guys, afterwards on my YouTube channel, that's going to be at 8 p.m. Eastern time. We'll be going through all the prop and betting stuff for round 1, so make sure to stop on by there for all of the round 1 exposure. That'll be on the sports books with matchups, also any of the pick'em sites like Underdog, Prize Picks. Let's go through a lineup together first. So with my lineup construction, I'm mostly just making sure that I have enough leverage in my build, depending on the contest that we're entering. Cash, some 50-50s, that's not really a concern whatsoever. But the larger the contest that we're entering, the more and more leverage that we're going to need. So for example, if we're going from a cash to like a single entry, something that's only got a couple hundred entries that we're playing against, ownership matters, because we want to have spots in our lineup that if we get right, we're vaulting ourselves way up that leaderboard where else nobody else is really getting those points. But it's not like we're worried about duplicating against 200 people. Unless you have chalk at all 6 spots, that's just not going to happen when you're only entering against less than 1,000 people. Now, to take it to the most extreme example, which is what we're going to do for building this lineup, the big $5 or $25 where you're talking about 20 to 50,000 entries, then there's a legit chance that you're duplicating yourself with other people. But then there's also a chance at the same time that you're not going to have leverage. Like even if you get all of your plays right, you're not moving up those GPPs enough to actually make it pay off. So we're going to build this for that big GPP just to take it to the extreme and show you exactly how much you need to be differentiating your lineups to accomplish not duplicating with other people and to accomplish that leverage that we're looking for. So I talked about having some guilty pleasures towards the top and that being okay. Let me show you what that would look like. So let's throw in a Ben Griffin. Let's throw in Akshay Bhatia as our second man in. Both players that are getting some pretty significant steam at the top. And then even to make this a little bit harder on ourselves, I'm going to throw in a player in the 8K range that is also getting a little bit of steam. So for the sake of this, I'm really going to force it a bit. We're going to throw in Siwoo Kim. So a Griffin Bhatia Siwoo Kim is a relatively chalky start. I would say most lineups, I'm probably not going that chalky. I might use like 2 of those 3 kind of players towards the top and then one slightly lower owned option. So like maybe, for example, in reality, rather than going to Siwoo Kim, I could see myself playing more of like a Denny McCarthy at $8,100, slightly lower owned. He's also a core play for me. So I obviously love Denny McCarthy this week regardless. But even if we went with a slightly chalkier example, it just means with your last 2 to 3 players that you're going to have to find some leverage. So maybe rather than going to a chalkier option like a Højgaard or a Matt Wallace, that's where I go to my JT Poston pivot instead, who has the elite tier course history. If you guys saw my core plays video on Monday, I think that his off the tee form is really sneaky good over the last month or so. So let's go ahead and throw him in there. He's not low owned. He's not like 2 to 3%, but he's average to below average ownership at the top end of that 7K range. And then our last two players, we're going to be really intentional about where we're getting different here. So I'm going to avoid somebody, for example, like a Jesper Svensson in this range. We're going to avoid the more popular options like even a Grillo in this 7K range and try and take somebody that's a little bit sneakier. And it's not like you have to be like so sneaky that you're at sub 1% in this range, but maybe it's a Bud Colley instead, who he's a good course fit. I mean, he's been playing extremely consistent golf this year. He's got some of the best form in that range, but he's not the chalk of the all chalk. So he's giving us at least a little bit of differentiation. And then for your last man in, as long as we're not taking the chalk of all chalk down here too, we're probably going to be just fine at a big $5 or $25. And in fact, even if you wanted to play Victor Perez, who is probably either him or Fishburne or a Hodges is going to be your highest owned player at $6,900. Even if you went with a Perez, a Fishburne, or a Hodges as your last man in, you probably get away with that in the large hill GPPs just because we are intentional with a Poston and a Colley. Now, if let's say that you really, really wanted to use Perez, and I think he's going to be the highest owned at that number, but I guess we'll see. If you really want to make sure that you're not going to duplicate yourself and you want to make sure that you have enough leverage, you can always leave some salary on the table. So if you feel like you're getting close to the line of maybe getting too chalky, and this lineup is kind of just on that line or getting close to it, I would say, in the big $5 or $25, then leave a couple $100 on the table, right? You could always go down here and throw in a Ricky Fowler at $8,500 instead, leave that $200 on the table, or maybe even go down to a Luke Clanton at $8,300, leave $400 on the table. In Clanton, if you guys remember the ownership section before, he was the lowest owned player that we had in the 8K range. So not only would that be leaving salary on the table, but also forcing in yet another pivot on top of that. So that's how you balance the ownership. It all depends about the contest that you're entering. If we were in the single entry or even just a smaller field GPP where there's, let's say sub 20 to 50,000 entries, then you don't have to be as worried about that ownership component. And, let's say that if you wanted to play Siwoo Kim and Victor Perez towards the bottom, no hesitation whatsoever in that kind of contest. So that's how that morphs from contest to contest. But that's all I've got, guys, for this week's DFS breakdown. Best of luck with all the lineups that you're entering. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those GPPs, and I hope that we can cash out in a lot of our contests as well. So again, rounds 2 through 4, we'll be doing live streams on this channel as well. So make sure to stop on by for those. And for the round 1 prop preview and bets for round 1 at this event, make sure to check out my YouTube channel. That is GSLukeDFS. You can find that on YouTube in the search bar. And here in just 3 or 4 minutes, going to be covering all the pick'em stuff for the next day of action. So until then, until tomorrow, guys, best of luck with everything that you're entering. And see you guys in a few minutes on my YouTube channel.